They called it an auction, but everyone in Mercy Wells knew it was a sale. The desert sun beat down on the wooden platform where Tessa Marlowe stood with bound wrists and unbowed eyes, her dress torn at the shoulder, a bruise blooming purple across her cheekbone. The crowd gathered like vultures circling carrion, their voices rising in bids that treated her flesh as currency to settle debts she never owed. She wouldn't beg, wouldn't cry. But when the leering faces pressed closer and hands reached toward the platform, one whisper escaped her cracked lips. "You'll regret choosing me." Then a quiet voice from the back called out a number that made the whole town fall silent. $1. Before we begin Tessa's journey from the auction block to freedom, I invite you to stay with us until the very end of this story. If you're moved by what unfolds, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale of redemption travels. Now, let's return to that dusty platform in Mercy Wells, where everything was about to change. The wooden platform creaked beneath Tessa's boots as she shifted her weight, the rope around her wrists biting into skin already raw from 3 days in the town jail. The mid-morning sun turned Mercy Wells into a furnace, heat rising in visible waves from the packed dirt street where townsfolk gathered in a half-circle of judgment and curiosity. "We'll start the bidding at $50, announced Marshal Eugene Hartley, a thick-necked man whose badge sat crooked on a vest straining against his gut. He held up a sheaf of papers that supposedly documented Tessa's crimes: vagrancy, theft of food, disturbing the peace by refusing lawful instruction. All lies wrapped in legal language, but truth had never mattered much in Mercy Wells. The crowd murmured. $50 was steep for a woman with no skills they valued, no family to ransom her, nothing but a sharp tongue and a history of running from every situation that tried to cage her. "20," called out a voice from near the general store. Tessa recognized him, Dutch Morris, who owned the saloon on the eastern edge of town. His establishment catered to the kind of men who paid for company and didn't ask questions when the company looked unwilling. Tessa's jaw tightened, but she kept her gaze fixed on the horizon beyond the crowd, where the desert stretched endlessly toward mountains that shimmered in the heat haze. She'd been trying to reach those mountains when the marshal's men caught her 2 miles outside town, dragged her back, and invented charges to justify what everyone already knew would happen. "25," came another bid. This one from Silas Crane, who ran the boarding house and always needed girls to scrub floors and wash linens. His wife had died the previous winter, and rumor said he'd worked her into an early grave. 30. A ranch hand she didn't recognize, his face weathered and his eyes calculating. She was livestock to him, a work animal to be purchased and used until she broke. The bids climbed slowly. 35, 40, 42. Each number was a link in a chain she could feel tightening around her future. Marshal Hartley's expression grew satisfied as the price rose. He'd get his cut. Everyone knew the marshal took a percentage of these debt settlements. The whole system was designed to turn human beings into profit, and Mercy Wells had perfected the machinery. 45, Dutch Morris called again, his voice carrying an edge of determination that made Tessa's stomach turn. She could read the intention in his eyes from across the crowd. She'd seen that look before, in other towns, on other men's faces. It was the look that said a woman was nothing more than flesh to be consumed. For the first time since they dragged her onto this platform, Tessa felt something crack in her composure. Not tears, she'd sworn she wouldn't give them tears, but something deeper, a fracture in the armor of defiance she'd worn for so long that she sometimes forgot it wasn't her actual skin. "You'll regret choosing me," she said, the words barely audible but sharp as broken glass. "Whoever buys this contract, I'll make your life hell until you wish you'd let me starve in that jail." Several people in the crowd laughed. A woman near the front, the miller's wife, righteous and respectable, shook her head with pursed lips. "Shameful," she muttered. "Doesn't even have the decency to be grateful someone's willing to take on her debts." Tessa almost laughed at that. Grateful. As if she'd asked to be dragged back to this town, thrown in a cell, and paraded like livestock in front of people who'd decided her worth before she ever opened her mouth. 45 going once, Marshal Hartley called, scanning the crowd for any final bids. 45 going twice, $1. The voice came from the back of the gathering, quiet but clear. The crowd turned as one, a ripple of movement and confused murmurs spreading through the assembly. Tessa's gaze found him immediately, a tall man in worn denim and a dusty hat, standing at the edge of the crowd with his thumbs hooked in his belt. He wasn't old, maybe 30, but he had the weathered look of someone who spent his life under the sun. His face was lean and shadowed beneath the hat brim, expression unreadable. Marshall Hartley sputtered. "Now see here, this is a legitimate proceeding. You can't just—" "The notice posted outside your office said bids accepted from $1 and up," the man said, his voice still quiet but carrying an edge of iron underneath. "Didn't say anything about minimum increments. Didn't say you could reject a legal offer." The marshal's face reddened. "This is highly irregular. $1 is my bid," the man repeated. "You accepting it or not?" Dutch Morris pushed forward through the crowd, anger tightening his features. "This is a mockery of the process, Cole Avery. You can't just—" "Can't just what?" Cole Avery's voice didn't rise, but something in his tone made Dutch pause mid-step. "Make a legal bid according to the posted terms?" "Pretty sure I can." Tessa watched this exchange with a confusion that cut through her exhaustion. She'd never seen this man before, had no idea why he'd involve himself in something that was clearly stacked against her from the start. The $1 bid was either an insult or a tactical move she didn't yet understand. Marshall Hartley looked around the crowd, clearly seeking support to reject this disruption of his profitable auction. But the law was the law, even in a town that bent it to suit the powerful. The notice had specified bids from $1 up, probably assuming nobody would be foolish enough to bid so low that the marshal's percentage would barely buy him lunch. "This ain't right," Silas Crane called out. "We got a system here." "System seems to work fine when it's lining your pockets," Cole said, his gaze moving from face to face in the crowd. "Less fine when someone uses it different than you planned." The tension stretched taut as rope in the desert air. Tessa could see the calculation happening in the marshal's eyes, trying to figure out if rejecting the bid would cause more problems than accepting it. The paperwork had been filed. Witnesses were present. If word got out that Mercy Wells rejected legal bids, it might bring scrutiny the town couldn't afford. "Fine," Marshall Hartley finally spat. $1, going once, twice, sold to Cole Avery. He thrust the papers toward Cole with barely concealed fury. "Take your property and get out of my sight." Cole walked forward through the crowd, which parted reluctantly to let him pass. Up close, Tessa could see his eyes, gray-blue like storm clouds, and just as hard to read. He took the papers from the marshal's hand, glanced at them briefly, then did something that made every jaw in Mercy Wells drop in unison. He tore the contract in half, then in half again, and again, until the pieces fluttered to the ground like snow in the desert heat. "She's not property," Cole said quietly, his words falling into absolute silence. "Not mine. Not anybody's." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folding knife. The crowd tensed. Several men's hands moved toward their guns, but Cole just opened the blade and stepped up onto the platform. Tessa's breath caught as he moved behind her, but instead of violence, she felt the rope around her wrists give way with 2 quick cuts. Her arms dropped to her sides, blood rushing back into her hands in a painful tingle. She turned to stare at this stranger who'd just upended the entire proceeding, trying to find words that wouldn't come. Cole stepped back down from the platform and addressed the crowd one more time. "Anybody got objections, you can take them up with the law, which says I bought this contract legal and proper, and what I do with my property is my business." He looked at the marshal. "That about sum it up?" Hartley's face was purple now, but he couldn't dispute the logic. "Get out of here, Avery, both of you." Cole gestured to Tessa, a small motion toward a horse tied near the edge of the crowd. She hesitated, every instinct warning her that nothing came free, that this was some new trap she didn't yet understand. But the alternative was standing on this platform while the bidding started again, and she'd already felt the rope on her wrists. She climbed down from the platform, her legs unsteady after 3 days in a cell and half an hour in the sun. The crowd watched in stunned silence as she walked past them. This woman who'd been marked as property and somehow walked away from the auction block unowned. Cole untied his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with kind eyes, and swung into the saddle. He offered his hand down to Tessa. "Ranch is 5 miles north. You can ride or walk. Your choice." Tessa looked at that offered hand for a long moment, weighing pride against practicality. Her boots were worn thin, Her body was exhausted, and 5 miles in the desert sun might finish what the jail hadn't. She took his hand. His grip was calloused and strong, and he pulled her up behind the saddle with easy strength. She settled onto the horse's back, acutely aware that she was now dependent on this stranger's mercy, a position she'd sworn never to be in again. They rode out of Mercy Wells in silence, the sun climbing higher and the town falling away behind them like a bad dream that clung to the edges of consciousness. The land stretched out in all directions, sagebrush and red dirt, distant mesas standing like sentinels, the kind of emptiness that could swallow a person whole. Tessa had crossed this territory on foot, stealing food where she could, sleeping in ravines and under overhangs, always moving, always running. Now she was riding away with a man whose motivation she didn't understand and whose kindness she didn't trust. After a mile of silence, she finally spoke. Why? Cole didn't turn, just kept his eyes on the faint trail ahead. Why what? Don't play stupid. You could have let them sell me to the highest bidder. Could have bought me proper if you wanted. Why tear up the papers? Seemed like the right thing to do. Nobody does the right thing for free. I did. Tessa's frustration rose like heat shimmer. So what? You expect gratitude? You want me to fall on my knees and thank you for saving me? Maybe you're planning to collect on this debt in other ways. I expect nothing, Cole said, his voice still maddeningly calm. You want to ride to my ranch, get some food, and rest? You're welcome to. You want to jump off this horse right now and walk back to Mercy Wells or out to the desert? That's your choice too. I'm not keeping you. Then what was the point? Cole was quiet for a long stretch. The horse's hooves thudded soft against the packed earth, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out against the blue vault of sky. Had a sister once, he finally said. Emma. She was 17 when she got in trouble with a merchant's son in Silver Fork. Town was all set to marry her off to him. Said it was her duty, her fault, her problem to fix by becoming his property, legal and proper. His voice carried no emotion, but Tessa could feel the tension in his shoulders where her hands rested lightly to keep her balance. I was working a ranch in Colorado Territory, didn't know what was happening until I got her letter. By the time I made it back to Silver Fork, she'd been married 6 weeks. Tessa waited, knowing there was more to this story and dreading where it led. Found her body in the river that same day I arrived, Cole continued, his tone still flat, still controlled. Coroner said accidental drowning, but I saw the bruises, saw the fear in the faces of the other women in town who wouldn't meet my eyes when I asked questions. That merchant's son got away with it because she was his wife, his property, and nobody could touch him for what he did to what was his. The desert stretched around them, indifferent to human tragedy, to systems that ground women into dust and called it justice. I'm sorry about your sister, Tessa said quietly. But I'm not her. And you saving me doesn't bring her back. I know that. Cole shifted slightly in the saddle. But I got to that river in Silver Fork too late to help Emma. Wasn't going to be too late in Mercy Wells. They rode the rest of the distance in silence. Tessa didn't know what to do with this man's grief, or his gesture, or the terrible logic that had brought her from an auction block to a horse's back carrying her toward an unknown future. She'd learned long ago not to trust kindness. It usually came with conditions written in fine print. But she was tired. So tired of running, of fighting, of surviving on nothing but anger and movement. And if this stranger wanted to offer food and rest with no strings attached, she'd accept it long enough to figure out what he really wanted. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a dark line against the horizon, then as distinct shapes. A house, a barn, corrals, a windmill turning lazy circles in the breeze. It wasn't grand, but it looked solid, cared for. The kind of place that suggested its owner took pride in maintenance and order. Cole rode up to the house and dismounted, then offered his hand to help Tessa down. She ignored it and slid off the horse herself, landing hard enough to jar her tired legs. A man emerged from the barn, older, maybe 60, with silver-gray hair and a face carved by sun and wind into something resembling ancient stone. He looked at Tessa with sharp eyes that missed nothing, then turned to Cole. This the girl from the auction? Tessa Marlowe, Cole said. Tessa, this is Wade Calder. He works the ranch with me. Lives in the small cabin past the barn. Wade nodded to her, his expression neutral. You're welcome here, miss, long as you need. Tessa's defenses rose immediately. I don't need charity. I can work for my keep. I've mucked stables, fixed fences, helped with harvests. Good to know, Cole interrupted. But first you need food and rest. Wade, can you take care of the horse? Already on it. Wade took the gelding's reins and led the animal toward the barn, moving with the easy competence of someone who'd spent a lifetime with horses. Cole turned to Tessa. Come on, I'll show you where you can stay. He led her into the house, clean, spare, functional. No frills, but no filth either. The main room held a table, chairs, a cast iron stove, shelves with basic supplies, everything in its place. Down a short hallway, Cole opened a door to a small bedroom. It held a bed with clean blankets, a chest of drawers, a washstand with a basin and pitcher. Nothing fancy, but it looked like luxury compared to the jail cell Tessa had occupied for the past 3 days. This was Emma's room when she visited, Cole said, his voice carefully neutral. Nobody's used it in 5 years. It's yours now. Tessa stepped inside, her eyes immediately going to the one detail that made this room different from a prison cell. A lock on the inside of the door. She could lock herself in, keep the world out, control who entered her space. There's water in the pitcher, Cole continued. I'll bring you some food in a bit. You can rest, clean up, whatever you need. Door locks from the inside. You use it if it makes you feel safer. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. I'm not going to lie and say I don't have expectations, because I do. I expect you'll decide for yourself what you want to do next. Stay, leave, head for the mountains, catch a stage to anywhere else. That's all your choice. But while you're here, you're safe. That's my only rule. Nobody touches you, nobody threatens you, and that includes me. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Tessa stood in the center of that small room, her body trembling with exhaustion and emotions she couldn't name. Slowly she walked to the door and turned the lock. The click of the mechanism sliding into place was the most beautiful sound she'd heard in years. She made it to the bed before her legs gave out, sinking onto the mattress that felt impossibly soft after jail cell stone and desert ground. The tears came then, hot and angry and relieved all at once, spilling down her cheeks as she pressed her face into the pillow to muffle the sounds. She cried for the girl on the auction block, for the woman who'd learned to trust nothing and no one, for the sister Cole lost to a system that ground women into property. She cried until the tears ran dry and sleep pulled her down into darkness. She woke to the smell of food and the slant of late afternoon light through the small window. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back in a rush. The auction, the $1 bid, the torn contract, the locked door. Tessa sat up slowly, her body aching in a dozen places. Someone had left a tray outside her door. She could smell bread and stew, coffee, and something sweet. Her stomach growled loud enough to echo in the small room. She unlocked the door and retrieved the tray, half expecting someone to be waiting to demand something in return. But the hallway was empty, the house quiet except for the faint sounds of movement from the main room. The stew was beef and vegetables, rich and hot. The bread was fresh, with butter that tasted like actual cream instead of the rancid substitutes Tessa had choked down in other towns. The coffee was strong and bitter and perfect. And the sweet thing was a slice of pie, apple, with cinnamon and sugar that made her want to cry again for reasons she couldn't articulate. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, trying to remember the last time she'd had food that didn't taste like desperation or theft. When the tray was empty, she used the water in the pitcher to wash her face and hands, scrubbing away 3 days of jail grime and auction dust. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, bruised, hollow-eyed, suspicious. A survivor who'd survived so many times that she'd forgotten there might be alternatives to survival. A knock on the doorframe made her spin around, heart hammering, but it was just Cole standing in the hallway with his hat in his hands, his expression carefully neutral. Didn't mean to startle you, he said. Just wanted to check if you needed anything else. I'm fine. The words came out sharper than she intended, defense mechanisms rising automatically. Cole nodded. All right. Well, there's more food in the kitchen if you get hungry later. Pumps out back if you want to wash up properly. Wade and I will be working around the ranch tomorrow. You can join us if you want, or you can rest. Your choice. He started to turn away, then paused. One more thing. There's a town meeting in Mercy Wells next week. They'll probably have questions about what happened today. I'll handle it, but if you want to be there, if you want to face them down and have your say, I'll take you. Your choice on that too. Why do you keep saying that? Tessa demanded. My choice, my choice. Like you're trying to convince me I have options. Because you do. Cole's gray-blue eyes met hers directly. No challenge in them, just statement of fact. Maybe you haven't had them before. Maybe the world spent so long telling you you're powerless that you started believing it. But you've got choices now. And I'm going to keep reminding you of that until you believe it too. He left before she could formulate a response, his boots echoing down the hallway and then fading into silence. Tessa stood in her borrowed room with its lock that worked, its clean bed, its window that showed darkening sky and distant mountains. She thought about choices, about the ones she'd made and the ones that had been stolen from her, about a man who'd bought her freedom for $1 and then given it to her with no strings attached. She didn't trust it, didn't trust him, didn't trust that kindness could exist without expectation of return. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was curious about what might happen next. The next morning arrived with the kind of silence that only exists far from towns and people. Tessa woke to birdsong and the distant creak of the windmill, sunlight streaming through her window to paint gold across the wooden floor. She dressed in the same worn clothes she'd been wearing for days, she had nothing else, and ventured out of her room. The house was empty, but she could hear sounds from outside. Through the kitchen window she saw Cole and Wade working near the corrals, their movements efficient and practiced. There was fresh coffee on the stove, still hot, bread and butter on the table. Someone had left these things for her without demanding she wake at any particular hour or present herself for inspection. Tessa poured coffee into a tin cup and stepped outside. The morning air was cool, would be hot by midday, but right now it carried the smell of sage and dust and something green from the garden patch she could see near the barn. Cole looked up as she approached the corral, his expression neutral. Morning. Morning. She sipped the coffee, watching as he worked on replacing a section of fence that had rotted through. You said I could help with work. I meant what I said. I'm not staying here for free. Wasn't planning on it being free. Cole gestured to a pile of fence posts nearby. You know how to set posts? I can learn. Good enough. He showed her the process, digging the hole, setting the post level, packing the dirt back in firm and solid. It was hard work, the kind that made your back ache and your hands blister. Tessa threw herself into it with something approaching fury, needing the physical labor to quiet the thoughts spinning in her head. They worked through the morning, speaking only when necessary. Wade joined them for a while, his presence comfortable and undemanding. He treated Tessa like any other ranch hand. No special consideration, no suspicious watching, just work that needed doing and hands to do it. By midday, Tessa's body was screaming in protest, but she'd helped set 6 new posts and repair a gate that had been hanging crooked. Cole called a break for lunch, cold beef sandwiches and water from the pump, and they sat in the shade of the barn while the desert heat built toward its peak. You're a hard worker, Wade observed, his tone matter of fact. Most folks coming off 3 days in jail wouldn't jump straight into fence repair. Most folks probably have somewhere better to be, Tessa replied. Do you? The question hung in the air like dust motes in sunlight. Did she have somewhere better to be? Some destination she'd been working toward when the marshal's men caught her outside Mercy Wells? No, she finally admitted. No, I don't. Then you might as well be here, Wade said simply. Work's honest, food's decent, and Cole's about as trustworthy as men come. Known him 8 years, never seen him go back on his word or treat anyone unfairly. Might seem strange to you right now, but it's the truth. Tessa looked at Cole, who was studiously focused on his sandwich, clearly uncomfortable with being discussed in the third person while sitting 3 feet away. Why'd you come to that auction? She asked him directly. How'd you even know about it? Cole was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. Wade heard about it in town, told me there was a girl being sold to cover debts she didn't owe. I remembered Emma, remembered being too late. Decided not to be too late this time. So, I'm what? Your penance? Your chance at redemption? You're a person who deserved better than being sold like livestock. Cole's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. That's all. Nobody does something like that without wanting something in return. Then maybe I'm the first, Cole said, meeting her eyes directly. Or maybe what I want is to live in a world where people don't get sold on auction blocks. Can't change the whole world, but I could do something about one auction in one town. So I did. It was the most he'd said at one time since pulling her onto his horse yesterday, and Tessa found herself believing him despite all her instincts screaming not to trust anyone's altruism. They finished lunch in silence, then went back to work. By the time the sun started its descent toward the horizon, they'd repaired a significant stretch of fence, and Tessa's hands were blistered raw despite the calluses she already carried. Cole noticed her trying to hide the pain as they put tools away. Without a word, he went into the house and returned with a small tin of salve. For the blisters, he said, handing it to her. Works better than letting them tear open. Tessa took the tin, embarrassed by the kindness and angry at herself for being embarrassed. Thanks. That night, she ate dinner at the table with Cole and Wade, beef stew again, but a different preparation, with potatoes and carrots from the garden and bread that Wade proudly claimed he'd baked himself. The conversation was sparse but comfortable, touching on work that needed doing, weather patterns, the health of the cattle they'd be moving to higher pasture come spring. Nobody asked Tessa about her past. Nobody demanded she explain herself or justify her existence. She was simply there, eating stew, existing in the present moment without obligation to perform gratitude or confession. After dinner, she retreated to her room and locked the door, not because she felt threatened, but because she could. Because having that choice, that control, was a luxury she was still learning to accept. She applied the salve to her blisters and lay in bed watching moonlight paint silver across the floor, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into night. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The windmill creaked its endless rotation, and for the first time in years, Tessa Marlowe fell asleep without planning her next escape. The days that followed developed a rhythm that Tessa didn't quite trust but couldn't deny finding comfort in. She woke with the sun, worked alongside Cole and Wade on whatever tasks the ranch demanded, ate meals that filled her belly without requiring payment or degradation, and retreated each night to the room with the lock that worked. It was almost normal, which made it terrifying in ways the auction block had never been. On the fifth morning, she found something unexpected on her windowsill. A cluster of wildflowers, purple and yellow blooms that must have come from the rocky hillside beyond the north pasture. They sat in a small jar of water, their petals still holding morning dew. Tessa stared at them for a long moment, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Nobody had given her flowers before. Not ever. She picked up the jar carefully, as if the flowers might disappear if handled too roughly, and carried them to the kitchen where Cole stood drinking coffee and reading a week-old newspaper Wade had brought from his last trip to town. "These yours?" she asked, holding up the jar. Cole glanced at the flowers, then back to his newspaper. "Saw them on my morning walk. Thought they might brighten up your room." "Why?" He lowered the paper, his gray-blue eyes meeting hers with that same steady calm that simultaneously irritated and reassured her. "Do I need a reason to pick flowers?" "Everyone needs a reason for everything." "Then maybe my reason is that I saw something pretty and thought you might like it too." He folded the newspaper and set it aside. Not everything's a transaction, Tessa. She wanted to argue, to push back against this casual kindness that felt like a trap she couldn't see the mechanism of. But the flowers were already in her hand, already making that small room feel less like a borrowed space and more like somewhere she might actually exist. "Thank you," she said finally, the words feeling strange and unfamiliar in her mouth. Cole just nodded and went back to his coffee. Later that morning, while they were working on clearing brush from the irrigation ditches, Wade brought up the subject Tessa had been dreading. "Town meeting's tomorrow," he said, pulling a stubborn root from the dried mud. Cole mentioned he was planning to attend. "You given any thought to whether you want to go?" Tessa drove her shovel into the ground harder than necessary. "What's the point? They've already decided who I am and what I'm worth." "Maybe," Wade agreed. "Or maybe they need to see you standing on your own 2 feet instead of on an auction platform with your hands tied. Might change some perspectives." "I don't care about changing their perspectives." "Fair enough. Wade tossed the root into their growing pile of cleared debris. But you might care about making sure they don't try this again with someone else. Marshall Hartley's been running these auctions for 3 years. You're the first person who ever walked away free. That stopped Tessa mid-swing with her shovel. She turned to look at Wade, really look at him. 3 years? How many others? At least a dozen that I know of. More that I don't. Wade's weathered face was grim. Women mostly, though occasionally men too. Anyone who can't pay fines or debts, anyone the town decides is vagrant or undesirable. They get auctioned off to work off their obligations, and most of them never get free again. The anger that rose in Tessa's chest was familiar, an old friend that had kept her moving when everything else failed. And nobody stopped it? Hard to stop something when the law's the one running it, Cole said from where he was working a few yards away. Marshall Hartley's got the territorial judge in his pocket, Judge Samuel Ross. They're cousins, and they've made sure the whole system's technically legal, even if it's morally bankrupt. Judge Ross, Tessa repeated. The name triggered something in her memory. She'd heard it in the jail, whispered between the deputies when they thought she wasn't listening. He's the one who signed the paperwork for my auction? Almost certainly. Cole straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. His signature's on every one of these contracts. Makes them legal, makes them binding, unless someone buys the contract and tears it up. Which nobody does, because why would they? Wade added. Folks who attend those auctions are looking for cheap labor or worse. They're not looking to set people free. Tessa thought about this. About a system designed to trap people and profit from their desperation. About judges and marshals who twisted law into chains. If I go to this town meeting, what exactly am I supposed to do? Stand up and tell my story so they can all feel briefly uncomfortable before going back to business as usual? You could do that, Cole said. Or you could make them answer for what they're doing. Force them to defend it in public, in front of witnesses who might not understand how the system works. Sometimes exposing rot is the first step to cutting it out. And you think my testimony would matter? I think you matter, Cole said simply, and I think you're stronger than they expected. That scares people like Hartley and Ross. They count on victims staying silent and powerless. You being neither of those things disrupts their whole operation. Tessa wanted to dismiss this as naive idealism, but she'd seen the marshal's face when Cole tore up that contract, seen the anger and fear in equal measure. Maybe there was something to the idea that her freedom threatened their system more than her silence ever could. I'll think about it, she said, which was more commitment than she'd planned to give. They worked through the afternoon, and by evening, Tessa's decision had crystallized into something solid and sharp as glass. She found Cole in the barn, checking on a mare who was close to foaling. I'll go to the meeting, she said without preamble, but I'm not going to stand there quiet and grateful. If I'm going to make them hear exactly what they did. Cole looked at her over the mare's back, his expression unreadable in the barn's dim light. All right, we leave at dawn. It's a 2-hour ride to Mercy Wells. Will Wade come too? If you want him to. Extra witness never hurts. Tessa nodded, then found herself asking the question that had been building for days. Why are you really doing this? And don't give me the line about your sister again. There's got to be more to it. Cole was quiet for a long moment, his hand gentle on the mare's neck. Emma's death broke something in me, he finally said. Made me realize that systems like the one in Silver Fork, like the one in Mercy Wells, they don't just hurt the people they're designed to hurt. They corrupt everyone who participates in them, everyone who looks away and pretends not to see. I couldn't save my sister, but I can refuse to participate in that corruption. I can stand against it when I have the chance. That's all I'm doing, standing against something that shouldn't exist. It was the most honest answer anyone had ever given Tessa, and she didn't quite know what to do with it. Okay, she said finally. Okay, we'll go to the meeting. That night she lay awake in her room, the wildflowers still fresh on her windowsill, and rehearsed in her mind all the things she wanted to say to the people of Mercy Wells, all the anger she wanted to pour out like poison from a wound. But underneath the anger was something else, something she didn't have words for yet, a tiny seed of possibility that maybe Cole was right. Maybe her freedom did matter. Maybe she could be more than just a survivor. Dawn came cold and clear. Tessa dressed in her cleanest clothes, which weren't very clean since she only had the one set, and met Cole and Wade by the horses. Cole had saddled 3 animals, including a gentle gray mare he said Tessa could ride. "Her name's Dove," he said, helping Tessa adjust her stirrups. "She's patient and steady. Won't give you any trouble." They rode out as the sun painted the desert gold and orange, 3 figures crossing empty land toward a town that had tried to break one of them and might try again. The journey passed mostly in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. As Mercy Wells came into view, Tessa felt her stomach tighten. The town looked different from horseback than it had from the auction platform. Smaller somehow, less imposing. Just a collection of buildings and people trying to carve existence from unforgiving land. The town meeting was being held in the church, the largest building in Mercy Wells, with its whitewashed walls and simple cross above the door. People were already gathering when Cole, Wade, and Tessa arrived. The conversations died as soon as Tessa dismounted, replaced by stares and whispers that followed her like shadows. Marshall Hartley stood near the church steps, his expression darkening when he saw her. "This is a town meeting, Avery, for residents and property owners." "I'm a property owner," Cole said calmly, "and Miss Marlowe is my guest." "Unless you're planning to bar guests from public meetings?" Hartley's jaw worked, but he couldn't argue with the logic. "Fine, but there will be no disruptions." They entered the church and found seats near the back. Tessa could feel eyes on her from every direction, some curious, some hostile, some carefully neutral. The miller's wife she'd seen at the auction sat 3 rows ahead, her back rigid with disapproval. Judge Samuel Ross called the meeting to order. He was a tall man in his 50s, silver-haired and distinguished-looking, with the kind of presence that commanded rooms. His voice carried authority as he outlined the agenda: discussion of water rights, approval of new business licenses, review of town ordinances. "We also need to address the irregularity that occurred at last week's debt settlement auction," Ross said, his gaze finding Cole in the back row. "Mr. Avery's interference in a legal proceeding has raised questions about the validity of our established processes." Cole stood, his voice calm but carrying clearly through the church. "With respect, Judge Ross, I didn't interfere with anything. I participated in an auction according to the posted terms and made a legal bid that was accepted by the presiding officer. What I did with my lawfully purchased property afterward is my own business." Several people in the audience murmured agreement. Ross's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "The spirit of these auctions is to ensure debts are paid and vagrant individuals are provided with honest work and supervision," Ross said. "Your actions undermine that spirit." "The spirit of these auctions is to turn people into profit," Tessa said, standing before she could talk herself out of it. Her voice shook slightly, but she pushed through it. "To create a system where anyone you don't like can be labeled vagrant or debtor and sold to whoever's willing to pay." The church went absolutely silent. Tessa could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, but she'd started this, and she was going to finish it. "I was arrested for vagrancy because I was passing through your town," she continued. "Marshall Hartley's men caught me 2 miles outside town limits, dragged me back, and invented charges to justify putting me on that platform. I owed no debts to anyone in Mercy Wells. I broke no laws. But I was young and female and alone, which apparently makes me fair game for your legal proceedings." "You were trespassing on private property," Hartley cut in. "Stealing food from—" "I was sleeping in an abandoned line shack 3 miles from the nearest occupied building," Tessa shot back. "And I took 2 pieces of jerky from a smokehouse that hadn't been used in months. That's what you call trespassing and theft? That's worth selling a human being? The law is the law," Ross said coldly. "And you were found guilty." "I was never tried," Tessa interrupted. "I was never given a chance to defend myself or face my accusers. I was just thrown in a cell and told I'd be auctioned to pay debts I didn't owe." Wade stood then, his weathered face hard as stone. "I've lived in this territory for 40 years, seen a lot of things I'm not proud of, but these auctions you've been running, they're slavery by another name, and everyone in this room knows it." "That's a serious accusation," Ross said, his voice dropping dangerously low. "It's a serious crime," Wade replied, "and the fact that you've made it legal doesn't make it right." The church erupted in competing voices, some agreeing, some arguing, some trying to restore order. Tessa remained standing, her hands clenched at her sides, watching Judge Ross's face cycle through anger and calculation. Finally, Ross raised his hand for silence. These are matters of law and order, not sentiment. Miss Marlowe was processed according to established procedures. Mr. Avery chose to purchase her contract and void it. That is his right as the buyer. But that doesn't invalidate the system itself. Then let's talk about the system, Cole said, still standing. How many people have been auctioned in the past 3 years, Judge Ross? I don't have exact numbers. 17, Wade said. I counted. 17 people sold in 3 years. How many of them ever worked off their supposed debts and gained their freedom? Ross's silence was answer enough. None, Wade continued. Not one. Because the system isn't designed to let them work off anything. It's designed to keep them trapped, working for whoever bought them until they die or disappear. That's not justice. That's bondage. The church had gone quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Several people in the audience were shifting uncomfortably, and Tessa could see calculations happening behind eyes that had never questioned the system before. I move that we suspend the debt settlement auctions pending a full review of their legality and implementation, said a voice from the middle of the room. Tessa turned to see a middle-aged woman standing, the school teacher, if she remembered correctly from her brief time in town. Seconded, said another voice, a merchant Tessa didn't know. Ross's face had gone carefully blank. This is highly irregular. These matters are typically handled by you and the marshal, the school teacher interrupted, which is exactly the problem. We're voting on this, Judge Ross. That's how town meetings work. What followed was 20 minutes of heated debate. Tessa sat down at some point, her legs shaking with adrenaline and something that might have been hope. Cole's hand found her shoulder briefly, a steadying weight, then withdrew. When the vote was finally called, it passed by a narrow margin, 17 in favor of suspension, 14 against. The debt settlement auctions would be paused until a committee could review the process and recommend changes. It wasn't complete victory. The system still existed. The people who'd profited from it were still in power, and Tessa had no illusions that this would fix everything. But it was something. A crack in the wall, a sign that enough people had been made uncomfortable by seeing the machinery of oppression up close. As the meeting adjourned and people filed out, several townspeople approached Tessa. Most just looked at her with new eyes, reassessing, but the school teacher stopped directly in front of her. I'm sorry, she said simply. I've walked past those auctions for 3 years and told myself it wasn't my business. I was wrong. Tessa didn't know how to respond to an apology she'd never expected to receive. Thank you, she finally managed. They rode back to the ranch in silence again, but it was a different quality of silence than the morning's journey. Something had shifted, though Tessa couldn't quite name what. As they unsaddled the horses, Wade spoke. That took courage. Standing up in there. I was terrified, Tessa admitted. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Cole said quietly. It's acting despite it. You did good today. That night, Tessa found another small gift on her windowsill. Not flowers this time, but a smooth river stone, perfectly round and cool to the touch. She turned it over in her hands, feeling its weight, its solidity. The next morning at breakfast, she asked Cole about it. Found it by the creek when I was checking the water level, he said. Thought you might like it. Why do you keep giving me things? Cole looked at her over his coffee cup, his expression thoughtful. Because you deserve to receive gifts. Because kindness shouldn't be so rare that it feels suspicious. And because watching you realize you're allowed to have nice things is worth the walk to the creek. Something cracked in Tessa's chest at that. Some piece of armor she'd worn so long it felt like skin. She picked up the stone and put it in her pocket, carrying its weight like a talisman. The weeks that followed brought changes both subtle and significant. Tessa worked the ranch with increasing confidence, learning skills she'd never had the stability to develop before. Cole taught her to ride better, to read the sky for weather, to fix things that broke instead of abandoning them. Wade showed her how to track animals, to identify plants, to find water in unlikely places. But the gifts continued. A hawk feather placed carefully by her door, a particularly beautiful piece of weathered wood. A handful of wild plums from a tree Wade knew about 3 miles north. Each gift was small, thoughtful, given without expectation of anything in return. Tessa tried to resist the warmth these gestures created in her chest, but it was getting harder. She'd built her whole life around the principle that kindness was conditional, that safety was temporary, that trusting anyone was inviting betrayal. But Cole kept being kind anyway, kept treating her like someone worthy of consideration and care. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and purple, Tessa found herself asking about Emma again. What was she like? Your sister? Cole was quiet for so long Tessa thought he wouldn't answer. Then, stubborn, smart, had a laugh that could make you smile even when everything was going wrong. She wanted to be a teacher, had books she'd saved up for, planned to go to the territorial school in Denver. He paused, his voice roughening slightly. She deserved better than what she got. Deserved a choice, a future, a life that was hers. I'm sorry I brought it up. Don't be. Cole turned to look at her, his eyes catching the last of the sunlight. Remembering her is how I make sure what happened to her means something. Every person I can help choose their own path. Every time I stand against systems that steal people's agency, that's Emma's legacy. That's how I keep her alive. Tessa felt tears prick her eyes and didn't try to hide them. She'd be proud of you.